The year was 1943, and death came screaming through the clouds at 300 miles per hour. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the controls of her damaged P-51 Mustang as enemy fighters closed in from three directions. Behind her, strapped unconscious in the rear compartment, lay General Robert Mitchell, the man who held the key to Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. Elena's fuel gauge showed less than 20 minutes of flight time. Her radio crackled with static and enemy voices speaking in rapid German. The closest Allied airfield was still 40 miles away, and between her and safety flew 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, their yellow nose cones gleaming like deadly wasps in the afternoon sun. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary rescue missions in aviation history, a story that military censors buried for 50 years, fearing it was too incredible for the public to believe. But Elena Vasquez didn't fly that day thinking about history or headlines.
She flew because, sometimes, when everything seems impossible, one person's courage becomes the thin line between hope and catastrophe. This is her story.
Elena Vasquez had always been different from other pilots. While her male counterparts boasted about their kills in the mess hall, she studied weather patterns and emergency procedures. While they practiced aerial acrobatics to impress visiting dignitaries, she flew rescue simulations until her hands moved automatically across the controls, even in her sleep. Born in a small farming town in Texas, Elena learned to fly before she could drive. Her father owned a crop dusting business, and by age 12 she was helping him navigate through dust storms that could blind a pilot in seconds. The local boys called her crazy when she announced her intention to join the military, but Elena had witnessed something that changed her forever. During the summer of 1938, a military transport plane crashed near her family's farm. Elena was first on the scene, and she pulled 2 injured airmen from the burning wreckage while fuel lines exploded around her. One of those men was Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, who would later become her commanding officer in the Women's Auxiliary Flying Squadron. He never forgot the fearless teenager who saved his life. When America entered World War II, Elena was among the first women accepted into the experimental pilot program. The military brass remained skeptical about female pilots, but they desperately needed experienced aviators for non-combat missions. Transport duty, they reasoned, would keep the women safely away from enemy fire while freeing up male pilots for fighter operations. Elena excelled in transport school, mastering aircraft that many veteran male pilots found challenging. The C-47 Skytrain, with its complex cargo configurations, became her specialty. She could calculate weight distribution in her head while navigating through mountain passes that terrified seasoned pilots. Her instructors noted an unusual quality in their reports. Elena remained completely calm under pressure, as if danger sharpened rather than dulled her focus. Her first overseas assignment came in early 1943, flying supply runs between Allied bases in North Africa. The routes took her over disputed territory where German fighters prowled like hungry sharks. Transport planes, slow and heavily loaded, made easy targets. Elena lost 3 friends during her first month overseas. Their plane shot down while carrying medical supplies to forward positions. The loss hardened something inside Elena. She began studying enemy fighter tactics, learning their attack patterns and weaknesses. During off-duty hours, she practiced evasive maneuvers that were technically forbidden for transport pilots. Her commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, looked the other way. He remembered the young woman who had risked everything to save strangers, and he suspected that Elena's unconventional training might someday save lives. The call came on a gray morning in March 1943. Elena was scheduled for a routine supply run to an advanced medical station when Colonel Harrison summoned her to his office. She found him standing behind his desk studying a classified map marked with red zones indicating heavy enemy activity. Harrison looked older than his 45 years. The war had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds since their arrival in North Africa. He gestured for Elena to close the door and take a seat. "Captain Vasquez," he began, using her formal rank, "I have a mission that goes beyond anything you've trained for. It's classified at the highest level, and if you accept, you'll be flying alone into territory where no Allied aircraft has returned." Elena studied the map, noting the German positions marked in red. The proposed flight path cut directly through what intelligence called the Valley of Death, a narrow corridor between mountain ranges where German fighters maintained constant patrol. "What's the cargo, sir?" she asked. Harrison hesitated before reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a photograph of a distinguished man in his 60s wearing the uniform of a brigadier general.
General Robert Mitchell was captured 3 days ago when his reconnaissance plane was forced down behind enemy lines. Our intelligence network managed to extract him from a German prison camp, but he's severely injured and unconscious. Elena examined the photograph. Even unconscious, General Mitchell's face showed the bearing of a man accustomed to command. But more importantly, she recognized him from intelligence briefings.
Mitchell was one of the primary architects of Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. His capture had sent shockwaves through the highest levels of Allied command.
The Germans don't yet know his identity, Harrison continued. They think he's just another captured pilot.
But that won't last long. Once they realize who they had, they'll launch a massive search operation.
We have perhaps 12 hours before enemy forces converge on the area. Elena traced the flight path with her finger.
The route would take her deep into German-controlled airspace, over terrain where radar installations could track her movement and fighter squadrons could intercept her before she reached the extraction point. A standard transport plane would never survive such a mission.
"I'll need a fighter aircraft," Elena said quietly. Harrison nodded. "We have one P-51 Mustang available, but it's been modified for long-range reconnaissance. The rear compartment can accommodate one injured person, but it means reduced fuel capacity and compromised maneuverability." Elena studied the specifications Harrison provided. The modified Mustang would give her the speed and agility to potentially outrun enemy fighters, but the extra weight and reduced fuel meant she would have exactly one chance to complete the mission.
There would be no margin for error, no opportunity for a second attempt. The extraction point is here. Harrison indicated a small clearing marked on the map.
"Our people will have General Mitchell waiting, but they can only maintain position for 30 minutes. If you're not there within that window, they'll have to abandon the site."
Elena calculated distances and fuel consumption in her head. The numbers were barely possible under perfect conditions. With enemy interference and potential combat, they became nearly impossible. But she thought about the men she had pulled from the burning wreckage years ago, and about the 3 friends she had lost over German territory. "I'll need detailed weather reports for the entire route," she said.
Harrison smiled for the first time in weeks. "I thought you might say that." "Meteorology has prepared a complete briefing. There's a storm system moving through the mountains that could provide cloud cover, but it also means severe turbulence and limited visibility."
Elena spent the next 4 hours studying every detail of the mission. She memorized radio frequencies, backup extraction points, and emergency procedures. The P-51 Mustang assigned to her mission had seen extensive combat, its aluminum skin patched in dozens of places. But the engine ran smoothly, and the controls responded precisely to her touch. The aircraft's previous pilot, Captain Mike Rodriguez, had been shot down 2 weeks earlier. His personal effects still occupied the cockpit. A photograph of his wife, a rosary hanging from the instrument panel, and a lucky coin taped to the dashboard.
Elena left them undisturbed, feeling somehow that their presence would bring protection to her mission. As evening approached, Elena completed her final preparations. She packed emergency medical supplies, extra ammunition, and survival gear. The weight calculations remained tight, but she refused to leave behind equipment that might save General Mitchell's life or her own. Colonel Harrison found her performing a last inspection of the aircraft as sunset painted the desert sky orange and purple. He carried a sealed envelope marked with security classifications that Elena had never seen before. "These are your final orders," he said, handing her the envelope. "Don't open them unless you're forced to deviate from the primary mission plan." "And Elena..."
He paused, using her first name for only the second time since she had arrived overseas.
"If this goes wrong, if you're captured or shot down, the official record will show that you were flying a routine reconnaissance mission. The government cannot acknowledge what you're really doing."
Elena nodded. She understood that she would be flying into history's shadows where heroism and sacrifice occurred without recognition or reward. But she also understood that General Mitchell's knowledge of Operation Overlord could determine whether the planned invasion succeeded or failed, potentially affecting the outcome of the entire war. At midnight, Elena climbed into the cockpit of the modified P-51 Mustang. The base had gone silent except for the distant rumble of generators and the occasional bark of guard dogs. Ground crews had painted over the aircraft's identifying markings, making it appear to be just another reconnaissance flight if spotted by enemy observation posts.
Elena ran through her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, but her mind wandered to her father's crop-dusting plane back in Texas. She remembered flying through dust storms so thick that she navigated by instinct alone, trusting her hands more than her eyes.
Tonight's mission would require that same kind of faith. The Merlin engine roared to life, its 12 cylinders generating over 1,500 horsepower. Elena felt the aircraft strain against its wheel brakes, eager to leap into the darkness. She adjusted her radio to the mission frequency and received clearance for takeoff. As the P-51 lifted off the runway, Elena looked back once at the lights of the Allied base. In a few hours, she would either be landing with General Mitchell safe in the rear compartment, or both of them would be dead somewhere in the German-controlled mountains ahead. There was no middle ground in this mission, no possibility of partial success. She banked toward the northeast, following a course that would take her over friendly territory for the first 100 miles before crossing into the unknown. Behind her, Colonel Harrison stood beside the runway, watching until her navigation lights disappeared into the night.
He would not sleep until her radio crackled with news of success or failure. Elena climbed to 15,000 feet above most of the German radar coverage, but below the altitude where oxygen became critical. The modified P-51 handled differently than her familiar transport planes, more sensitive to control inputs but also more responsive. She spent the first hour of flight learning the aircraft's personality, understanding how it would behave when she asked it to perform beyond normal limits. The storm system that meteorology had predicted appeared ahead of her, its massive cloud formations lit by internal lightning. Elena flew toward it deliberately, knowing that the electrical interference would mask her approach from German radar installations. But she also knew that flying through a thunderstorm in a fighter aircraft required skills that no training program had taught her. As the first wisps of cloud enveloped her aircraft, Elena felt the turbulence begin. The P-51 bucked and rolled as conflicting air currents grabbed at its wings, rain hammered against the canopy, and lightning illuminated the cockpit in brief, brilliant flashes. But Elena held her course, trusting her instruments and her instincts as she flew deeper into the heart of the storm. Somewhere ahead, General Mitchell waited unconscious and helpless, his life depending entirely on Elena's ability to navigate through impossible conditions and outfight enemy pilots who had never lost an engagement to a woman. The most dangerous part of her mission was about to begin. The thunderstorm proved to be both Elena's salvation and her greatest challenge. Lightning strikes came so frequently that her cockpit strobed like a photographer's studio, each flash revealing towering cloud formations that stretched beyond the limits of her aircraft's ceiling. The electrical activity scrambled German radar systems across a 100-mile front, but it also threatened to tear her aircraft apart with turbulence that no pilot training had prepared her to handle. Elena fought to maintain level flight as vertical air currents lifted and dropped her aircraft like a child's toy. The modified P-51 groaned under stresses that its designers never anticipated. Rivets popped loose from wing panels, and metal fatigue created spiderweb patterns across the aluminum skin. But the Merlin engine continued running smoothly, its 12 cylinders providing the power she needed to punch through the worst of the weather. Navigation became a matter of dead reckoning and instinct. Her compass spun wildly from magnetic interference, and radio beacons disappeared beneath layers of static. Elena relied on brief glimpses of terrain features between lightning strikes, matching mountain peaks and river valleys to the maps she had memorized during mission planning. Each landmark confirmed that she remained on course toward the extraction point, but they also reminded her that she was flying deeper into German-controlled territory with every mile. The storm began to weaken as Elena approached the mountain range that marked the German frontier. Cloud cover thinned, revealing patches of moonlit landscape below. She descended to 8,000 feet, trading altitude for concealment among the mountain peaks. German observation posts occupied many of the high ridges equipped with searchlights and radio equipment that could vector fighter patrols toward intruding aircraft. Elena's training in crop dusting proved invaluable as she threaded between mountain peaks, following valley floors that twisted like serpents through the rocky terrain. She flew without navigation lights, her aircraft invisible against the dark mountain backdrop. But she also flew without backup, knowing that a single navigation error could send her crashing into a cliff face or directly over a German military installation. The radio crackled to life as Elena approached the extraction zone. A voice speaking English with a slight British accent provided coded updates on the situation at the landing site. The resistance team had reached General Mitchell's location, but German patrols were converging on the area. Enemy forces included 2 full infantry companies supported by armored vehicles and at least 1 fighter squadron on standby alert. Elena checked her fuel gauge and calculated her remaining flight time. She had burned more fuel than planned fighting through the storm, leaving her with approximately 45 minutes of flight time at current consumption rates. The extraction site lay 15 miles ahead, but the return journey would require her to climb over mountain peaks that would increase fuel consumption significantly. She keyed her radio microphone, transmitting a brief acknowledgement that confirmed her approach. The resistance leader's response carried urgent undertones that made Elena's stomach clench. German forces had detected unusual radioactivity in the area and were beginning systematic sweeps of possible landing sites. The 30-minute extraction window had been reduced to 15 minutes. Elena pushed the throttle forward,
coaxing extra speed from her already straining engine. The P-51 accelerated through the mountain valleys, its exhaust flames creating brief orange streaks in the darkness. She calculated new approach vectors, looking for ways to reduce the time between her arrival and departure from the extraction site. The landing zone appeared exactly where intelligence had indicated, a narrow meadow carved from the forest by avalanches, barely long enough to accommodate a fighter aircraft. Elena circled once at low altitude, studying the terrain and watching for signs of enemy activity. The meadow appeared empty except for 3 figures positioned near its center, one lying motionless while 2 others maintained watch positions. Elena lined up for her approach, extending landing flaps and reducing power to idle. The P-51 dropped toward the meadow like a falling stone, its landing gear extended and locked. She touched down hard, bouncing twice before settling onto the rough grass surface. The aircraft rolled to a stop less than 50 feet from the tree line. Even before the engine stopped turning, the 2 resistance fighters were running toward her aircraft. Elena popped the canopy and scrambled out of the cockpit, helping them lift General Mitchell's unconscious form into the rear compartment. The general appeared to be in his 60s, his gray hair matted with dried blood from a head wound. His breathing remained shallow but steady, and his pulse felt strong beneath Elena's fingers. The resistance leader, a thin man with intelligent eyes and careful movements, provided a rapid briefing while they secured General Mitchell in the aircraft. German patrols had passed within half a mile of their position twice during the past hour. Radio intercepts indicated that enemy forces suspected Allied activity in the area but had not yet pinpointed the exact location. Elena performed a quick pre-flight inspection while the resistance fighters prepared for their own evacuation. They would escape on foot through mountain trails that led to neutral territory, a journey that would take them 3 days through some of the most dangerous terrain in occupied Europe. But their mission was complete. General Mitchell was conscious enough to transfer critical intelligence before losing consciousness again. The general stirred as Elena started the engine, his eyes opening briefly to focus on her face. He attempted to speak, but Elena gestured for him to remain quiet. Whatever secrets he carried could wait until they reached Allied territory. Her job was simply to keep him alive long enough to share those secrets with the people who needed them most. Elena taxied to the far end of the meadow, calculating the takeoff run required to clear the trees. The P-51 carried significantly more weight than during her approach, and the soft ground would reduce acceleration. She would need every available inch of the makeshift runway to get airborne before hitting the forest. She pushed the throttle to full power and released the brakes. The aircraft lurched forward, gaining speed slowly on the uneven surface. Elena held the stick forward, keeping the tailwheel firmly planted until she reached flying speed. At the last possible moment, she pulled back on the controls. The P-51 lifted off barely 10 feet from the trees, its landing gear retracting as it climbed into the night sky. Behind them, the resistance fighters watched from concealed positions until Elena's aircraft disappeared over the mountain ridge. They had completed their part of an operation that would remain classified for 50 years. Their names known only to a handful of intelligence officers who understood the true significance of what had just occurred. Elena climbed to 12,000 feet, following a return route that would take her through different mountain passes to avoid German patrols that might be responding to reports of aircraft activity. General Mitchell remained unconscious but stable, his breathing regular and his color gradually improving. The head wound appeared to be superficial, but Elena suspected internal injuries that would require immediate medical attention. 20 minutes into the return flight, Elena's fuel situation became critical. She had burned more fuel than calculated during takeoff from the soft meadow surface, and headwinds were increasing her consumption rate. Simple arithmetic indicated that she would run out of fuel at least 10 miles short of Allied territory. Elena reduced power to minimum flight settings, trading speed for fuel economy. The P-51 slowed to barely above stall speed, but she was able to stretch her fuel consumption significantly. She also began a gradual descent, using gravity to maintain forward momentum while reducing the load on her engine. The fuel gauge showed less than 5 gallons remaining when Elena spotted the lights of the Allied airbase ahead. She keyed her radio, transmitting the emergency code that would clear all other traffic from the airport approach pattern. Ground control responded immediately, vectoring fire trucks and ambulances to positions along the runway. Elena's engine coughed twice as she lined up for final approach, its fuel-starved cylinders beginning to misfire. She reduced power to idle and began a controlled glide toward the runway, knowing that she would get only one chance to land safely. The P-51 dropped through the night air like a stone, its propeller windmilling silently in the airstream. She touched down just past the runway threshold, the aircraft's main landing gear connecting with concrete just as the engine seized completely. Elena applied brakes gently, bringing the P-51 to a stop less than halfway down the runway. Behind her, General Mitchell stirred again as rescue crews surrounded the aircraft. Medical personnel carefully extracted the general from the rear compartment while Elena completed her post-flight checklist. Her hands shook slightly as she shut down electrical systems and secured the aircraft controls.
The magnitude of what she had just accomplished was beginning to sink in. She had flown alone into heavily defended German territory, extracted a critically important prisoner, and returned safely despite fuel exhaustion and impossible weather conditions. Colonel Harrison appeared beside her aircraft as Elena climbed down from the cockpit.
His face showed relief mixed with amazement as he studied the battle damage her plane had sustained during the storm passage. Lightning strikes had burned holes through both wingtips, and turbulence had loosened dozens of access panels.
"How's the general?" Elena asked. "Conscious and talking," Harrison replied.
"The medics think he'll make a full recovery. More importantly, he's already provided critical intelligence about German defensive positions along the invasion coast." Elena nodded, too exhausted to feel the satisfaction that should have accompanied successful mission completion. She had flown for 6 hours through conditions that would have challenged the most experienced combat pilots, and she had brought home the most important prisoner of the war. But she had also learned something about herself that would change her forever. When everything seemed impossible, when death appeared certain, she had remained calm and focused. Harrison studied Elena's face in the harsh light of the runway floods. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Intelligence intercepted German radio transmissions during your extraction. They know that someone penetrated their airspace and removed a high-value prisoner. They're mobilizing every available fighter squadron to prevent any similar operations." Elena understood the implication immediately. Her mission had been successful, but it had also alerted German forces to Allied capabilities they had not previously suspected. Future rescue operations would face dramatically increased resistance, and pilots would encounter enemy tactics specifically designed to counter the methods Elena had used. "They'll be waiting for us next time," she said. "Yes," Harrison agreed, "which is why there won't be a next time. At least not like this one." Elena looked back at her aircraft, noting the battle damage and engine seizure that had ended her flight. The P-51 would require weeks of repair before it could fly again, and she suspected that similar missions would require different aircraft and different tactics. The war was evolving rapidly, forcing both sides to develop new technologies and new strategies. But General Mitchell was safe, and the intelligence he carried would help ensure the success of Operation Overlord. In a few months, Allied forces would storm the beaches of Normandy with detailed knowledge of German defensive positions, knowledge that would save thousands of lives and potentially shorten the war by months or even years. Elena walked toward the debriefing room, where intelligence officers waited to record every detail of her mission. Behind her, ground crews began the process of repairing her aircraft, working through the night to prepare it for future operations. The war continued, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new impossible missions. But tonight, Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes one person's courage and skill could change the course of history. She had flown into the darkness and returned with hope, demonstrating that even the most heavily defended enemy territory could not stop a pilot who combined exceptional skill with absolute determination. Her story was just beginning. 3 weeks after her successful extraction of General Mitchell, Elena received new orders that would test her abilities in ways she never anticipated. The intelligence that Mitchell had provided proved invaluable for Operation Overlord planning, but it also revealed the existence of a secret German research facility hidden in the mountains of occupied France. This facility was developing new radar technology that could potentially detect Allied aircraft at distances previously thought impossible. Colonel Harrison briefed Elena on the new mission in a secured underground facility that hummed with radio equipment and intelligence analysis stations. Maps covered every wall, marked with German positions, Allied plans, and target priorities that shifted daily as the war evolved. The atmosphere felt different than during her previous briefing, more tense, more urgent, as if time itself had become a weapon that both sides fought to control. The Germans call it Project Night Eye, Harrison explained, pointing to reconnaissance photographs that showed a complex of buildings nestled in a mountain valley. Our sources indicate they're close to perfecting a radar system that can track individual aircraft at ranges exceeding 200 miles. If they succeed, our entire air strategy becomes obsolete overnight. Elena studied the photographs, noting the facility's position relative to known German fighter bases. The installation appeared to be heavily defended, with anti-aircraft guns positioned around its perimeter, and what looked like underground bunker systems built into the mountainside. More concerning were the unusual antenna arrays that suggested sophisticated electronic equipment. Intelligence believes they're planning to test the new radar system within the next 72 hours. Harrison continued. We need someone to get close enough to photograph the installation and plant electronic monitoring devices that will allow us to intercept their test transmissions. Elena traced potential approach routes on the map, calculating distances and fuel requirements. The mission would require her to fly deep into German territory during daylight hours, when enemy fighters maintained constant patrols and visual observation posts could track her movement. Unlike her previous night extraction mission, this operation would provide no cover of darkness. What aircraft will I be flying? She asked. Harrison hesitated before answering. We're assigning you a captured German Focke-Wulf 190. Our intelligence people have been working on it for months, and it's now indistinguishable from an aircraft that might be conducting routine reconnaissance for the German Air Force. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Flying a captured enemy aircraft meant that she would receive no protection from Allied forces if her mission was detected. Friendly fighters would attack her on sight, and German forces would expect her to respond to their radio communications and follow their flight protocols. One mistake in procedure or identification could result in her being shot down by either side. The technical intelligence team has prepared a complete briefing on German radio procedures and aircraft identification codes, Harrison continued. You'll need to memorize flight patterns, communication protocols, and emergency procedures that German pilots use. If challenged by German air control, you'll need to respond exactly as a German pilot would. Elena spent the next 48 hours in intensive preparation that pushed her mental and physical capabilities to their limits. She memorized German radio procedures, studying recordings of actual German pilot communications until she could reproduce their accent and terminology perfectly. Military historians provided detailed briefings on German military culture and hierarchy, teaching her how to respond to orders and challenges in ways that would not arouse suspicion. The captured Focke-Wulf 190 proved to be a revelation in aircraft design and performance. Its BMW radial engine produced over 1,700 horsepower, giving it acceleration and climbing ability that exceeded anything Elena had previously flown. The aircraft's wide-track landing gear provided stability during ground operations, while its heavy armament made it one of the most feared fighter aircraft in the German Air Force. Elena practiced flying the FW-190 until its controls became as familiar as her own hands. She learned to manage its tendency to roll left during high-power climbs and to compensate for its heavy nose during landing approaches. The aircraft demanded precise control inputs but rewarded skilled pilots with performance capabilities that could outfly almost any Allied fighter except the newest models. German mechanics who had defected to the Allied side provided insights into maintenance procedures and common mechanical problems. They taught Elena how to recognize engine problems that might force an emergency landing and how to perform basic repairs using tools that German pilots typically carried. This knowledge might mean the difference between successful mission completion and catastrophic failure behind enemy lines. The mission briefing revealed complexities that made Elena's previous extraction operation seem simple by comparison. She would take off from an abandoned German airfield that Allied forces had captured but not yet officially occupied. Flight controllers at nearby German bases would expect routine reconnaissance traffic, but they would also monitor all aircraft movements and investigate any unusual activity. Elena's flight path would take her over occupied French territory where German observation posts maintained visual surveillance of all air traffic. She would need to follow standard German patrol routes while gradually deviating toward her target area. If questioned about course changes, she had been provided with cover stories about mechanical problems and weather avoidance. The actual target facility lay in a valley surrounded by peaks that rose to over 8,000 feet. Elena would need to approach at low altitude to avoid radar detection, but the mountainous terrain created turbulence that could damage sensitive photographic equipment. She would have only minutes to complete her reconnaissance and plant monitoring devices before German fighters arrived to investigate her presence. Weather conditions on the morning of her mission appeared perfect. Clear skies with light winds that would allow precise flying but also maximum visibility for enemy observation posts. Elena performed her pre-flight inspection of the Focke-Wulf, while German ground personnel went through motions of routine maintenance. To external observers, she appeared to be just another pilot preparing for a standard reconnaissance mission. The BMW engine started with a rumble that shook the entire aircraft. Elena ran through German pre-flight procedures exactly as a Luftwaffe pilot would, checking instruments and radio equipment according to protocols she had memorized. When ground control cleared her for takeoff, she responded in fluent German, acknowledging runway conditions and weather updates. The FW-190 accelerated rapidly down the concrete runway, its powerful engine pulling the aircraft into a steep climb. Elena banked toward the east, following a standard reconnaissance route that would take her over friendly territory before turning toward her actual target. German radio controllers tracked her progress, occasionally requesting position updates that Elena provided with increasing confidence. 45 minutes into her flight, Elena began the delicate process of deviating from her planned route. She reported minor engine problems that required her to reduce altitude and alter course toward what she claimed was an emergency landing field. German controllers acknowledged her situation and provided vectors toward the nearest suitable airfield, not realizing that Elena was actually heading toward her target. The mountain valley containing the German research facility appeared exactly as reconnaissance photographs had shown, but Elena immediately noticed details that aerial imagery had missed. The facility was much larger than intelligence had estimated, with additional buildings hidden beneath camouflage netting and defensive positions that commanded every possible approach route. Elena flew directly over the installation at 2,000 feet, ostensibly conducting a routine navigation check while actually photographing every structure and antenna array. The sophisticated camera equipment hidden in her aircraft's wing roots captured detailed images of equipment that would prove invaluable to Allied scientists working on their own radar development programs. As she completed her photographic run, Elena noticed unusual activity around the facility's main building. German personnel were positioning large antenna arrays and connecting electronic equipment that suggested an imminent test of their new radar system. She realized that her timing had been perfect. She was witnessing preparations for the very test that Allied intelligence needed to monitor. Elena circled the valley once more, using the excuse of mechanical problems to justify her continued presence over the area. During this second pass, she activated electronic monitoring equipment that would record German radar transmissions during their test. The devices would operate automatically for several days, collecting intelligence that could help Allied scientists develop countermeasures. But Elena's presence had not gone unnoticed. German security forces at the facility recognized that the aircraft circling their installation was not following any authorized reconnaissance pattern. They activated emergency procedures, alerting nearby fighter bases and requesting immediate interception of the suspicious aircraft. Elena's radio crackled with urgent transmissions as German air defense controllers demanded immediate identification and ordered her to land at the nearest military airfield. She responded with practiced calmness, maintaining her cover story about mechanical problems while slowly climbing away from the valley. But she could see dust clouds on mountain roads that indicated German ground forces were responding to the security alert. The first German fighter appeared as a distant speck against the southern horizon, climbing rapidly toward Elena's position. Intelligence briefings had warned her that Messerschmitt Bf-109s based at nearby airfields maintained readiness status that allowed them to intercept intruding aircraft within minutes of alert activation. Elena had hoped to complete her mission and escape before this response could materialize. Elena pushed the throttle to maximum power, coaxing every available horsepower from the BMW engine. The Focke-Wulf accelerated rapidly, but she was flying a reconnaissance variant that carried camera equipment instead of ammunition. If forced to fight, she would be completely defenseless against aircraft specifically designed for air-to-air combat. The pursuing Bf-109 closed rapidly, its pilot following standard German intercept procedures as he positioned his aircraft for positive identification. Elena maintained her radio communications in fluent German, continuing to claim mechanical problems that required immediate landing at friendly facilities. But the pursuing pilot was experienced enough to recognize evasive behavior disguised as emergency procedures. Elena dove toward a mountain pass that would provide temporary concealment from both the pursuing fighter and German radar installations. The narrow canyon twisted between sheer rock walls that rose thousands of feet above her aircraft. Flying at high speed through such terrain required precision that left no margin for error, but Elena had learned mountain flying during her childhood in Texas. The Bf-109 pilot attempted to follow Elena into the canyon but was forced to break off his pursuit when the narrow passage proved too dangerous for his aircraft's higher wing loading. He climbed above the mountain range, positioning himself to intercept Elena when she emerged from the pass. But Elena had studied topographic maps with the thoroughness that had made her reputation, and she knew about side canyons that would allow escape routes invisible to aircraft flying at higher altitudes. Elena emerged from the mountain range at an unexpected location, flying barely 50 feet above a river valley that led toward Allied territory. She had successfully evaded immediate pursuit, but German controllers were now vectoring additional fighters toward her escape route. The radio traffic indicated that at least 6 aircraft were converging on her position from different directions.
Fuel consumption had been higher than planned due to the high-power flying required for mountain navigation and pursuit evasion.
Elena calculated that she had perhaps 20 minutes of flight time remaining, but the nearest Allied airfield lay at least 30 minutes away at current consumption rates. She would need to find a place to land and refuel, or accept that her mission would end in enemy territory.
Elena remembered intelligence briefings that mentioned a small Allied outpost hidden in the mountains approximately 15 minutes ahead. The installation consisted of a weather station and communication facility that supported Allied reconnaissance operations, but it also maintained a small fuel depot for emergency use. Landing there would be dangerous, but it represented her only chance of reaching friendly territory alive. The weather station appeared as Elena crested a mountain ridge, its radio antennas barely visible against the rocky background. A narrow grass strip served as a landing area, but it was significantly shorter than any runway Elena had previously used. She would need to approach at minimum flying speed and apply maximum braking immediately upon touchdown. Elena lined up for approach as her fuel gauge indicated less than 5 minutes of remaining flight time. The Focke-Wulf descended rapidly toward the mountain airstrip, its landing flaps extended and landing gear locked in position. She touched down hard and immediately applied brakes, bringing the aircraft to a stop just short of the trees at the far end of the strip. Allied personnel at the weather station had monitored German radio traffic and understood the situation immediately. They began refueling Elena's aircraft while she transmitted coded messages confirming successful mission completion. The photographic intelligence and electronic monitoring devices had captured exactly the information that Allied scientists needed to develop countermeasures against German radar technology. But Elena's troubles were far from over. German ground forces were systematically searching every possible landing site within her aircraft's fuel range. They had identified the weather station as a probable location and were dispatching mountain troops to investigate. Elena had perhaps 30 minutes before enemy forces arrived at her position. Refueling operations proceeded with urgent efficiency while Elena studied maps for escape routes that would avoid known German positions. She would need to fly at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection, but the mountain terrain made such flying extremely hazardous. One navigation error could send her crashing into a cliff face or directly over a German military installation. As the last fuel truck pulled away from her aircraft, Elena noticed a column of German vehicles climbing the mountain road toward the weather station. Enemy forces were closer than intelligence had estimated, and they were approaching the facility with the speed and determination of troops who understood the importance of their mission. Elena had minutes, not hours, before her escape route would be blocked by enemy action. Elena started the BMW engine and taxied rapidly toward the takeoff position. Allied personnel at the weather station began their own evacuation procedures, destroying sensitive equipment and preparing to escape into the mountains on foot. They had provided Elena with the fuel she needed to complete her mission, but now they faced their own desperate struggle for survival. The Focke-Wulf lifted off just as the first German vehicles appeared at the weather station perimeter. Elena climbed rapidly while enemy soldiers poured from their vehicles and began setting up defensive positions. Behind her, Allied personnel disappeared into forest trails that would lead them to safety if they could avoid pursuit long enough to reach neutral territory. Elena flew toward home with photographic evidence and electronic intelligence that would prove crucial to Allied victory in the air war. But she also carried the knowledge that her mission had cost the lives of brave people who had risked everything to support her operation. The weather station personnel might escape, but their facility was destroyed and their mission compromised. As she crossed into Allied airspace, Elena reflected on the increasingly complex nature of modern warfare. Her successful missions were saving Allied lives and shortening the war, but they were also putting innocent people at risk and forcing difficult moral choices. Victory came with a price that extended far beyond military casualties, touching the lives of civilians and resistance fighters who struggled in the shadows of history. The war was changing, and Elena was changing with it. Each mission taught her new skills and revealed new aspects of her own character. She was becoming something that military planners had never anticipated, a pilot whose capabilities exceeded the limitations of traditional military thinking. But she was also learning that exceptional ability brought exceptional responsibility, and that some victories could only be achieved at terrible cost. 2 months after her reconnaissance mission over the German radar facility, Elena found herself facing the most challenging assignment of her military career. Intelligence had identified a high-ranking German scientist who was attempting to defect to the Allied forces, carrying with him complete plans for a revolutionary jet aircraft engine that could change the balance of air power. Dr. Hermann Kaufmann had developed technology that promised to make German fighters faster than anything the Allies could produce, but he had grown disillusioned with Nazi ideology,
and was seeking to prevent his innovations from prolonging the war.
The situation presented unprecedented complexity because Dr. Kaufman was being held under protective custody by German intelligence services who suspected his loyalty.
He had managed to send coded messages through resistance networks, indicating his location and requesting immediate extraction. But he was being moved between safe houses every 48 hours, and German counterintelligence agents were conducting systematic sweeps to identify potential security breaches.
Colonel Harrison briefed Elena in a specially secured facility where maps of occupied Europe covered walls and tables displayed intelligence photographs that revealed the scope of German defensive preparations. The atmosphere felt different than during previous briefings, more urgent, more desperate, as if Allied commanders understood that they were approaching a crucial turning point in the war's development. Dr. Kaufman represents our best opportunity to understand German jet technology before it becomes operational, Harrison explained, indicating photographs that showed mysterious aircraft shapes at experimental airfields. Our scientists believe the Germans are perhaps 6 months ahead of us in jet engine development. If they achieve operational deployment before we develop countermeasures, our entire air superiority strategy becomes obsolete. Elena studied intelligence reports that described Dr. Kaufman as a brilliant but naive scientist who had initially supported German technical development but gradually realized the implications of his work.
He had been instrumental in developing the Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engine, but recent intelligence indicated that he was working on an even more advanced design that could power aircraft capable of speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour. The extraction window is extremely narrow, Harrison continued. Dr. Kaufman will be at a specific location for exactly 4 hours tomorrow night. German security forces are moving him to a new safe house, but they're taking a route that passes through a small town where resistance fighters can create a diversion. We'll have one chance to get him out.
Elena examined the target area on detailed maps that showed every building, road, and potential landing site within 50 miles. The extraction point lay in the middle of a valley surrounded by mountains, with German military installations positioned to control all major approach routes.
Enemy radar stations could track aircraft movement throughout the region, and fighter squadrons maintained alert status at nearby airfields. What aircraft will I be using? Elena asked, though she suspected the answer would present new challenges.
Harrison gestured toward technical specifications displayed on a nearby table. We're assigning you the new P-51D Mustang, equipped with experimental long-range fuel tanks and enhanced communication equipment. It's faster and more maneuverable than anything you've flown before, but it's also heavier and more complex to operate.
Elena studied the aircraft specifications with growing excitement and concern.
The P-51D represented the pinnacle of American fighter technology, with a Packard-built Merlin engine that produced over 1,500 horsepower and gave the aircraft performance capabilities that exceeded most German fighters. But the experimental modifications meant she would be flying an aircraft configuration that had never been tested under combat conditions.
The mission planning revealed layers of complexity that made previous operations seem simple by comparison. Elena would take off from England and fly across occupied France to reach the extraction point, a journey that would require her to navigate through multiple layers of German air defenses while maintaining radio silence.
She would need to time her approach precisely to arrive at the exact moment when resistance fighters created their diversionary action. Elena spent the next 18 hours in intensive preparation that pushed her physical and mental capabilities to new limits. She memorized every detail of the flight route, studying German fighter patrol patterns and identifying safe corridors through their defensive networks. Technical specialists briefed her on the P-51D's advanced systems, teaching her to manage fuel consumption and navigate using equipment that represented the latest developments in aviation technology. The experimental long-range fuel tanks extended the Mustang's range to over 2,000 miles, but they also changed the aircraft's handling characteristics dramatically. Elena practiced flying with different fuel loads, learning how the shifting center of gravity affected control response and stall characteristics. The additional weight would make takeoff and landing more challenging, while the tanks themselves created drag that reduced maximum speed. Weather conditions on the mission day appeared marginal, with scattered clouds and occasional rain showers that could provide concealment but would also make navigation more difficult. Elena completed her pre-flight inspection as dawn broke over the English countryside, noting that ground crews had painted her aircraft in special camouflage that would make it nearly invisible against typical European terrain. The Packard Merlin engine started with a roar that echoed across the airfield, its supercharger whistling as Elena advanced the throttle. She performed extensive engine checks, testing every system that would be critical during the 8-hour mission ahead.
The P-51D responded beautifully to control inputs, but Elena could feel the additional weight from the fuel tanks in every movement. Elena's takeoff from the English airfield marked the beginning of the most dangerous solo flight ever attempted by an Allied pilot. She climbed to 25,000 feet, above most German radar coverage but still low enough to avoid leaving contrails that could reveal her position. The English Channel passed beneath her aircraft in 30 minutes, its gray waters dotted with ships that represented the massive logistical effort required to support Allied operations. The coast of occupied France appeared exactly as intelligence photographs had shown, but Elena immediately noticed details that reconnaissance images had missed. German defensive positions extended much further inland than expected, with radar installations and anti-aircraft guns positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. She would need to fly with exceptional precision to avoid detection during the approach to her target area. Elena descended to 15,000 feet as she crossed the French coastline, following the route that intelligence had identified as offering the best chance of avoiding German radar detection. She flew between known radar installations, using their overlapping coverage patterns to create blind spots where her aircraft would be invisible to electronic surveillance. But this required navigation accuracy that left no margin for error. 2 hours into the mission, Elena encountered the first serious challenge when German fighters appeared on patrol ahead of her planned route. Intelligence had predicted this possibility, but the timing and position of the enemy aircraft forced her to deviate significantly from her intended course. She altered heading toward the south, adding 30 minutes to her flight time and increasing fuel consumption beyond planned parameters. The course change took Elena over territory where German ground forces maintained intensive activity. She could see convoys of military vehicles moving along mountain roads, while artillery positions occupied commanding heights throughout the region. The level of German military activity suggested that enemy commanders suspected Allied operations in the area and were taking extraordinary precautions. Elena's radio remained silent according to mission protocol, but she monitored German military frequencies to track enemy air activity. The radio traffic indicated increasing German concern about unidentified aircraft movements, with fighter squadrons being moved to forward positions and radar operators being placed on maximum alert status. Her presence had been detected, though not yet precisely located. The mountain range surrounding Elena's target area appeared as a wall of peaks that rose to over 10,000 feet, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Elena climbed to 18,000 feet to clear the highest peaks, but the thin air at that altitude reduced her engine performance and increased fuel consumption significantly. She was burning fuel faster than planned, with still over 2 hours of flight time remaining. As Elena approached the target valley, she began monitoring resistance radio frequencies for updates on Dr. Kaufman's location and the timing of the diversionary operation. The coded transmissions indicated that German security forces had detected unusual activity in the area and were conducting systematic searches of all buildings where the scientist might be hidden. Elena descended toward the valley floor as the sun began setting behind the western mountains. The extraction point appeared exactly as described, a small meadow beside a forest that provided concealment for approaching aircraft. But Elena noticed fresh vehicle tracks in the surrounding area that suggested German patrols had been investigating potential landing sites. The resistance radio frequency crackled with the coded signal that indicated Dr. Kaufman was in position and ready for extraction. Elena lined up for her approach to the meadow while explosions erupted from the nearby town where resistance fighters were attacking German supply convoys to create the planned diversion. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley as Elena committed to her landing approach. Elena touched down on the soft grass surface with the P-51D's main landing gear, immediately applying brakes to bring the heavy aircraft to a stop. Before the propeller stopped turning, 3 figures emerged from the forest and ran toward her aircraft. Elena recognized Dr. Kaufman from intelligence photographs, a thin man in his 50s who moved with the careful precision of a scientist accustomed to detailed work. The other 2 figures were resistance fighters who had risked their lives to extract the German scientist from his hiding place. They helped Dr. Kaufman into the rear compartment that had been modified to accommodate a passenger, while Elena performed rapid pre-flight checks. The entire ground operation took less than 3 minutes, but Elena could hear vehicles approaching on mountain roads as German forces responded to the diversionary attacks. Elena taxied quickly to the far end of the meadow, calculating the takeoff run required to clear trees that seemed higher and closer than during her approach. The P-51D carried additional weight from Dr. Kaufman and his scientific documents, while the soft ground would reduce acceleration compared to a concrete runway. She would need perfect technique to get airborne before hitting the forest. The Mustang's engine roared to maximum power as Elena released the brakes and began her takeoff roll.
The aircraft accelerated slowly on the uneven surface, its landing gear compressing and extending as it encountered bumps and depressions.
Elena held the stick forward until she reached flying speed, then pulled back sharply to lift the aircraft into the air. The P-51D cleared the trees by less than 20 feet, its landing gear retracting as Elena climbed steeply toward the mountain ridge. Behind them, German vehicles reached the meadow just in time to see her aircraft disappearing over the peaks. Radio transmissions erupted with urgent reports of successful Allied extraction operations, while fighter squadrons received orders to intercept the escaping aircraft. Dr. Fiesau. Kaufman remained conscious but silent during the initial climb, his face pale from the stress of his escape and the realization that his life now depended entirely on Elena's flying abilities. He carried briefcases containing technical documents that represented years of advanced research, information that could potentially shift the balance of technological development between Germany and the Allied nations. Elena climbed to 20,000 feet while monitoring German radio frequencies that crackled with increasingly urgent communications. Enemy commanders were mobilizing every available aircraft to intercept her before she could reach Allied territory. Fighter squadrons were being scrambled from bases throughout occupied Europe, while radar installations were being adjusted to provide maximum coverage of her escape routes. The first German fighters appeared 30 minutes after takeoff, climbing rapidly from airfields that Elena had hoped to avoid. Intelligence had underestimated the speed of German response, and enemy pilots were following intercept vectors that would bring them into engagement range within minutes. Elena pushed her throttle to maximum power, coaxing extra speed from the Merlin engine. The pursuing aircraft were Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs, the latest variant of Germany's most successful fighter design. They carried fuel loads that limited their range but gave them performance advantages in speed and climbing ability. Elena realized that she could not outrun them in level flight, but she might be able to outmaneuver them if she could force them into a turning engagement. Elena dove toward a cloud layer that offered temporary concealment, hoping to break visual contact with the pursuing fighters. The P-51D accelerated rapidly in the dive, reaching speeds that approached the aircraft's maximum design limits. Dr. Kaufman gripped his seat as negative gravity forces lifted him against his restraint harness. The first Bf-19 opened fire as Elena emerged from the cloud layer, its 20 cannon shells creating bright tracers that flashed past her aircraft's canopy.
Elena rolled into a steep turn that brought her around behind the German fighter, but she was flying an unarmed aircraft and could not return fire. Her only weapon was superior flying skill and intimate knowledge of her aircraft's capabilities.
Elena's evasive maneuvering led the engagement toward mountain peaks where thermal updrafts created turbulence that made accurate shooting nearly impossible. She used her knowledge of mountain flying to position herself in areas where German pilots would struggle to maintain pursuit while she remained in complete control of her aircraft. The P-51D's superior high-altitude performance began to show as the engagement continued above 15,000 feet. But fuel consumption during high-power combat maneuvering was much higher than planned, and Elena realized that she might not have enough fuel to reach Allied territory even if she escaped immediate pursuit. The experimental long-range tanks had performed well during normal cruise flight, but combat conditions created consumption rates that exceeded all calculations. Elena dove toward lower altitude where her engine would produce more power, accepting the risk of ground fire in exchange for better performance against the pursuing fighters. The mountain valleys offered concealment opportunities, but they also channeled her movement along predictable paths where German pilots could position themselves for intercept attacks. Dr. Kaufman attempted to communicate with Elena during a brief lull in the aerial combat, but the engine noise and G-forces made conversation impossible. He could see the fuel gauges indicating dangerously low levels, and he understood that his rescue might cost Elena her life. His scientific mind calculated probabilities and distances, reaching conclusions that filled him with despair about their chances of survival. The second wave of German fighters appeared, just as Elena thought she had evaded the initial pursuit. Intelligence had failed to identify reserve squadrons based at forward airfields, and fresh aircraft with full fuel loads were climbing to intercept her aircraft. Elena counted 6 new contacts approaching from different directions, positioning themselves to prevent any escape toward Allied territory. Elena realized that conventional evasion tactics would not succeed against so many opponents with superior numbers and position. She needed to do something unexpected, something that German pilots had never encountered and would not know how to counter. Her mind raced through possibilities while she continued evasive maneuvering that kept her ahead of immediate pursuit. Elena remembered her experience flying through the thunderstorm during her first extraction mission.
and she noticed towering cumulus clouds building along the mountain ridges as the day's heating created unstable atmospheric conditions.
Flying into such weather would be extremely dangerous, but it would also create conditions where German fighters could not maintain formation or coordinate their attacks. Elena turned directly toward the largest storm cell, pushing her throttle to maximum power as she climbed toward clouds that rose above 30,000 feet.
The German pilots initially attempted to follow, but the turbulence and lightning activity forced them to break off their pursuit. Elena disappeared into the storm as darkness fell across the mountains. Flying through the storm system tested Elena's skills and her aircraft's structural limits more severely than any previous challenge. Lightning strikes illuminated the cockpit while turbulence threw the P-51D around like debris in a tornado. But Elena had learned storm flying during her childhood, and she understood how to use weather as both concealment and weapon. Elena emerged from the storm system 50 miles from where she had entered, completely beyond the search area that German fighters could cover with their remaining fuel. She was alone in the darkness over hostile territory with barely enough fuel to reach the English Channel, carrying a passenger whose knowledge might determine the outcome of the war. The most dangerous part of her mission was about to begin. Elena emerged from the storm system with her fuel gauge showing less than 30 minutes of flight time remaining, while the English Channel still lay more than an hour away at normal cruise power settings.
Dr. Kaufman sat silent in the rear compartment, his scientific mind calculating the same impossible mathematics that Elena faced. They were flying an equation that had no solution, carrying intelligence that could change the war but lacking the fuel to deliver it.
The storm had scattered the pursuing German fighters, but it had also pushed Elena's aircraft far off course and consumed precious fuel fighting through turbulence that demanded constant power adjustments. Elena reduced throttle to minimum cruise settings, trading speed for fuel economy while calculating emergency landing options in hostile territory. Every airfield within range belonged to German forces that would either kill her immediately or extract Dr. Kaufman's secrets through interrogation. Elena's radio crackled with distant transmissions as German controllers directed search patterns throughout the region. Enemy forces understood that an Allied aircraft had penetrated deep into their territory and extracted a high-value target, but they had lost track of her position during the storm passage. German radar stations were sweeping methodically, but their coverage remained limited by the mountainous terrain Elena had used for concealment. Dr. Sapio. Kaufman finally broke his silence as Elena adjusted her course toward the west, speaking in accented but fluent English. Captain, I must tell you something about my research that your intelligence services do not understand. Documents I carry describe not just jet engine technology but a complete weapons system that could make conventional aircraft obsolete within months. Elena glanced back at the scientist, noting the intensity in his eyes and the way his hands gripped the briefcase containing his research. What kind of weapons system? Guided missiles powered by rocket engines, Dr. Kaufman explained. Aircraft that can fly without pilots, directed by radio control toward enemy targets. If the German military successfully deploys this technology, your bombing missions will become suicide operations, and air superiority will belong entirely to whoever controls the guidance systems. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the high-altitude cold. She understood immediately that Dr. Kaufman was describing technology that would revolutionize warfare completely, making traditional military strategies obsolete and potentially giving decisive advantage to whichever side deployed it first. The intelligence he carried represented more than scientific advancement. It was the key to determining which side would win the war. How close are they to operational deployment? Elena asked. Perhaps 6 months if development continues without interference, Dr. Kaufman replied. But the research requires specific materials and manufacturing capabilities that could be disrupted if your forces understand the critical vulnerabilities. Elena pushed her throttle slightly forward, accepting reduced fuel economy in exchange for higher speed. Dr. Kaufman's information changed the urgency of their mission completely. They were no longer simply carrying valuable intelligence, but information that could prevent German development of weapons that would make Allied victory impossible. Every minute of delay potentially cost Allied lives and shortened the time frame for successful intervention. The fuel gauge indicated 15 minutes of flight time remaining when Elena spotted lights ahead that marked the French coast. The English Channel appeared as a dark expanse beyond the coastline, its waters illuminated by moonlight that had broken through the dissipating storm clouds. But Elena calculated that her fuel would be exhausted long before she could reach the English shore, leaving her with the choice between ditching in the Channel or attempting an emergency landing in German-occupied territory. Elena keyed her radio microphone, transmitting on emergency frequencies that Allied listening posts monitored continuously. She provided coded position reports and fuel status, requesting immediate assistance from any friendly forces in the area. The response came within minutes.
A British motor torpedo boat was patrolling approximately 20 miles from her position and could provide rescue services if she could reach their location. Elena adjusted her course toward the reported position of the British vessel, calculating that she had perhaps 5 minutes of fuel remaining when she reached their location.
Ditching the P-51D in channel waters would be extremely dangerous, especially in darkness with an injured passenger, but it represented their only chance of delivering Dr.
Kaufman's intelligence to Allied forces. Dr. Kaufman understood their situation without explanation, having monitored Elena's radio communications and observed her fuel calculations. He began preparing for water survival, securing his research documents in waterproof containers and positioning himself for emergency evacuation. Despite his fear, he maintained the calm professionalism of a scientist focused on problem-solving rather than panic. Elena's engine began coughing as fuel starvation affected the carburetor mixture, its 12 cylinders running increasingly roughly as air bubbles entered the fuel lines. She advanced the mixture control to full ridge, trading fuel economy for engine reliability during the critical final minutes of flight. The P-51D continued flying smoothly, but Elena could feel the subtle vibrations that indicated impending power failure. The British motor torpedo boat appeared exactly where radio communications had indicated, its wake visible as a white line against the dark water. Elena circled once at low altitude, flashing her navigation lights to signal her intention to ditch nearby. The boat's crew acknowledged with searchlights, positioning their vessel to provide maximum assistance during water rescue operations. Elena's engine seized completely as she lined up for final approach to the water, its propeller windmilling silently in the airstream. The P-51D became a glider with landing characteristics that no training manual had ever described, but Elena used her experience with emergency procedures to maintain controlled flight during the descent. Dr. Kaufman braced himself for impact while Elena prepared for the most challenging landing of her career. The Mustang struck the channel waters at minimum flying speed, its landing flaps extended to reduce impact velocity. Elena held the stick back to keep the nose high, allowing the aircraft's main landing gear to contact the water first. The P-51D skipped twice across the surface before settling into the waves, its canopy remaining intact as water surged around the fuselage. Elena immediately released her safety harness and helped Dr. Kaufman exit the aircraft through the sliding canopy. Cold seawater shocked them both as they abandoned the sinking P-51D, but their life vests provided buoyancy while they swam toward the approaching British vessel. Behind them, Elena's aircraft disappeared beneath the waves, carrying with it the machine that had served her faithfully through impossible missions. British sailors pulled Elena and Dr. Kaufman from the water within minutes of their aircraft sinking, providing warm clothing and medical attention while the motor torpedo boat raced toward English ports. Radio communications confirmed that Dr. Kaufman's identity and the critical nature of his intelligence, while Elena provided initial debriefing information that would guide immediate Allied response. Kaufman's intelligence proved to be even more significant than initial assessments had indicated. His research documents revealed not only German jet and rocket technology, but also detailed information about manufacturing facilities, material requirements, and personnel involved in secret weapons development. Allied planners immediately began organizing bombing missions and sabotage operations designed to disrupt German programs before they could achieve operational capability. Elena spent 3 days in British hospitals recovering from exposure and exhaustion while intelligence officers conducted detailed debriefings about her mission and observations of German defensive capabilities. Her reports provided crucial information about German radar installations, fighter patrol patterns, and the effectiveness of various penetration techniques. Military analysts used her intelligence to plan future operations with improved chances of success. Colonel Harrison visited Elena in the hospital, bringing news that her missions had contributed directly to Allied preparations for Operation Overlord. General Mitchell's intelligence had guided invasion planning, while her reconnaissance of German radar facilities had enabled development of electronic countermeasures. Dr. Kaufman's defection had provided information that would prevent German deployment of weapons that could have made the invasion impossible. The invasion is scheduled for next month, Harrison informed her. Allied forces will land in Normandy with detailed knowledge of German defensive positions, electronic countermeasures against their radar systems, and understanding of their advanced weapons programs. Your missions made that possible. Elena listened quietly, understanding that her individual flights had contributed to a massive military operation involving millions of people and determining the fate of entire nations. But she also understood that her role in history would remain classified, hidden in intelligence files that would not be opened for decades. Her heroism would be measured not in public recognition but in lives saved and objectives achieved.
Dr. Kaufman's intelligence enabled Allied bombing missions that destroyed key German research facilities and manufacturing plants, delaying deployment of jet fighters and guided missiles until after the war's outcome had been decided. The scientist himself joined Allied weapons development programs, helping to design countermeasures against German technology while advancing American rocket and missile research. Elena received new orders assigning her to fighter escort missions supporting the Normandy invasion. She would fly combat operations over the invasion beaches, protecting Allied bombers and transport aircraft from German fighter attacks. Her experience with deep penetration missions and evasive flying would prove invaluable during the massive air battles that accompanied Operation Overlord.
The peace axis, 51D, assigned to Elena for invasion support, bore the same type designation as the aircraft she had ditched in the English Channel. But this machine was configured for air-to-air combat rather than long-range reconnaissance. She spent weeks training with the new aircraft, learning to use its armament systems and practicing formation flying with other escort pilots.
On June 6, 1944, Elena flew her PTCA-51D over the Normandy beaches as Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history. Thousands of ships crowded the English Channel while paratroopers descended behind German lines and assault troops fought their way onto heavily defended beaches. Elena's role was to prevent German fighters from attacking the vulnerable transport aircraft and gliders that carried airborne forces to their objectives, but as Congress today is, German air response to the invasion proved weaker than expected, largely because Allied bombing missions guided by intelligence Elena had helped gather had destroyed many Luftwaffe bases and aircraft. The few German fighters that appeared over the invasion area found themselves outnumbered by Allied escorts flying aircraft with performance advantages derived from captured technology and defector intelligence. Elena flew 4 combat missions on D-Day, engaging German fighters that attempted to attack Allied ground forces and transport aircraft. Her experience with German aircraft and tactics gained during her reconnaissance missions enabled her to anticipate enemy maneuvers and position her aircraft for successful intercepts. She scored 3 confirmed victories against Focke-Wulf 190S and Messerschmitt Bf 109S. The success of Operation Overlord validated the intelligence-gathering missions that Elena had risked her life to complete. Allied forces established a permanent foothold in Nazi-occupied Europe, beginning the final phase of the war in Western Europe.
German resistance proved less effective than anticipated, partly because their advanced weapons programs had been disrupted by sabotage operations based on Dr. Kaufman's intelligence.
Elena continued flying combat missions throughout the summer of 1944, supporting Allied advances across France and into Germany itself. Her mission tally grew to include transport flights, reconnaissance operations, and fighter escorts, but none matched the individual significance of her early intelligence-gathering flights.
She had proven that exceptional skill and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Elena returned to the United States carrying decorations and commendations that recognized her military service but could not acknowledge her most important contributions.
The missions that had changed the course of the war remained classified, known only to a handful of intelligence officers and military commanders who understood their true significance.
Elena resumed civilian life in Texas, returning to the crop dusting business that had taught her to fly. She never spoke publicly about her wartime experiences, maintaining the security classifications that protected operational methods and personnel still engaged in intelligence work. Her neighbors knew her as a skilled pilot who had served overseas, but they never learned that she had single-handedly conducted missions that helped determine the war's outcome. 50 years later, when classified documents were finally released through Freedom of Information requests, historians discovered records of Elena's missions and recognized their extraordinary nature.
Military aviation experts analyzed her flights and concluded that her achievements represented some of the most remarkable individual accomplishments in aviation history. Elena Vasquez had proven that courage and skill could triumph over impossible odds. That one person's determination could change the course of history. She had flown alone into the heart of enemy territory and returned with intelligence that saved countless lives and shortened the war. Her story became a testament to the extraordinary capabilities that ordinary people can demonstrate when faced with extraordinary challenges.
But Elena herself remained modest about her achievements, understanding that her individual success had depended on the support and sacrifice of countless others. Resistance fighters had risked their lives to provide intelligence and support. Ground crews had maintained her aircraft under dangerous conditions. Intelligence officers had planned missions with precision that made success possible. Elena's legacy extended beyond her individual flights to inspire future generations of pilots who pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. Her techniques for evasive flying and emergency procedures became standard training for military pilots. Her example proved that exceptional performance resulted from thorough preparation combined with the courage to attempt what others considered impossible. The 3 missions that defined Elena's wartime service represented turning points in the development of modern military aviation. Her flights demonstrated capabilities that military planners had never imagined, proving that properly trained pilots could penetrate the most heavily defended airspace and complete missions that conventional wisdom deemed impossible. Her success changed how military leaders thought about special operations and individual pilot capabilities. Elena Vasquez had answered the call when everything seemed hopeless, when success appeared impossible, and when the fate of nations hung in the balance. She had proven that sometimes, when the stakes are highest and the odds most desperate, one person's extraordinary courage can tip the balance between freedom and tyranny, between hope and despair. Her story reminds us that heroes emerge not from superhuman abilities, but from ordinary people who refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible.
Outnumbered in the sky, a lone female pilot defied enemy fighters to save a captured general.